Every football fan thinks that their club is uniquely stupid and chaotic. Manchester United fans refer to a period of time in which they won the FA Cup, the League Cup and the Europa League, as well as finishing second twice in 4 years, as their banter era. Typical City was trending on social media after Manchester City lost the FA Cup final against Crystal Palace last week, despite Man City literally having won 18 trophies in the preceding 7 seasons, dominating English football, and still being capable of finishing third this season at the time of recording. And finishing second or only reaching the semi-finals of the Champions League is enough to prompt talks of a crisis at Bayern Munich. By the same token, it is always possible to find a club that has things worse than your own. Reminiscent of a footballing version of the Four Yorkshiremen sketch, Manchester United fans have it better than Reading fans, whose club was almost liquidated before a takeover was completed this season. Reading fans have it better than Farsley Celtic fans, whose club was just relegated 3 divisions in a single season. And Farsley Celtic fans have it better than Wigan Borough fans, whose club was dissolved in 1931 as a result of the Great Depression. Admittedly, there probably aren't many of them still around. Everything is relative though. Nonetheless, by almost any metric, Hull City is a fairly chaotic club. In my lifetime alone, and I am not quite 30 yet, Hull City have been locked out of their own stadium after it was repossessed by the club's former owners, entered into administration, were almost liquidated, moved into a new stadium, won 3 promotions in 5 seasons, completing the joint fastest rise from the 4th to the 1st tier of English football during the Premier League era, and reaching the top flight for the first time in the more than 100-year history of the club, came back down again just 2 years later with crippling debts and, once again, at risk of administration and liquidation, got saved by the Allams, who won promotion back into the Premier League, reached a first ever FA Cup final, and qualified for Europe for the first time, but also tried to change the club's name to Hull Tigers, owing to a feud with the local council, scrapped concessionary tickets, and told the club supporters that they could die when they want, effectively removing all funding and eventually dropping from the Premier League down into League One for the first time in 15 years. And that's just a snapshot. I didn't even mention Phil Brown's team talk on the pitch, nearly signing Mohamed Salah, or losing 8-0 against Wigan Athletic. Well, having sacked Liam Rosenior after finishing 7th last season, only to finish 21st this season, avoiding relegation to League One only by virtue of goal difference on the final day of the season, for which the manager who was brought in mid-season to keep us up, and managed to keep us up, has, yes, you guessed it, also just been sacked. Hull City's owner has since claimed that using racial slurs isn't racist if you don't mean it, and that racism doesn't exist in Turkey, in an impassioned offence of perhaps football's best-known racist, who he wanted to appoint. Honestly, this football club. So yeah, we are doing this again. For the 8th time in 5 years, and the 4th time in 13 months, it is time for yet another update on the insane football club that I am fortunate enough to support. So sit back, relax, and join me on yet another journey to East Yorkshire, the birthplace of the man who codified the rules of modern football, the world's greatest football club, and the world's greatest and most humble football YouTuber, as we take yet another look at the trials and tribulations of a football club that has only not been involved in either a promotion race or relegation scrap twice in the last 20 plus seasons, appears to be allergic to winning games at home, and whose director's box seems to attract more rogues than the docks at The Hague. It has been less than 6 months since my last Hull City video, but I'll give a very brief introduction for the uninitiated. After Hull City were relegated from the Premier League in 2010 with £35 million in debt, Egyptian-British businessman Allam bought the club for the nominal fee of £1 with a commitment to clear the club's debt. Allam described his investment as a gift to the city of Hull, as he felt an obligation to give something back to the area that had given so much to him. At first, things went pretty well. Hull stabilised in the 2010-11 season, mounted a playoff challenge in 2011-12, and won promotion under Steve Bruce in 2012-13. In their first season back in the top flight, the Tigers secured their highest ever points tally and highest ever league position in the Premier League, as well as reaching their first ever FA Cup final, where they led 2-0 against Arsenal before losing 3-2 after extra time, and qualifying for Europe for the first time in the process. With even moderately sane communication and interpersonal skills, father and son chairman and vice-chairman duo Assem and Ihab Allam could have been as beloved in the city of Hull as Mick Ronson, William Wilberforce, or Ronnie Pickering, and had statues outside of the MKM Stadium. Instead, Assem proved to be a vindictive and megalomaniacal narcissist who responded to not being allowed to buy Hull City Stadium from Hull City Council by threatening to build a new one and attempting to change the club's name to Hull Tigers, ostensibly because that would have more global appeal, but actually because Hull City AFC shared too many words with Hull City Council as far as he was concerned, then decided to punish supporters by scrapping concessions, removing funding, and telling them that they could die when they wanted in response to backlash against his name change idea. Meanwhile, Ihab turned out to be a clueless nepo baby who lacked even the good sense of his father to stay out of football matters and not wage war with the club's own coaching staff, only critics and supporters. The relationship between Hull City supporters and the Allam soured during what was, on the pitch, the club's most successful period of all time, and by the second half of the 2010s, following 2 Premier League relegations, the frequent sale and departure of the club's star players, and ultimately relegation to League One, it had shattered beyond all repair. Attendances at the MKM Stadium halved in just 4 years, falling to by far their lowest level since the Tigers moved to their new ground in 2002, but despite claiming to have put the club up for sale in 2014, it took nearly 8 years for the Allams to actually sell up. That sale finally arrived in January 2022, when Turkish oligarch and media mogul Acun Ilıcalı acquired the club through his holding company Acun Medya. A famous face in Turkey, it would be fair to say that not much was known about Ilıcalı in Hull, but following several years of apathy under the Allams, in which many supporters had fallen out of love with the sport, most fans would have welcomed a joint takeover bid by Vladimir Putin and James Corden if it meant finally getting rid of the previous regime. What's more, Ilıcalı didn't just represent a break from the Allams, his early engagement with supporters was overwhelmingly positive. He reduced ticket prices, took fans on free all-inclusive trips to Turkey, and offered free travel for select away days. All of this helped to buy Ilıcalı further goodwill with supporters, as well as turning around the club's dwindling attendances. There likely would have been a significant uptick in attendances following the departure of the Allams regardless, but the speed with which average attendances at the MKM Stadium rose from 12,000 back up to almost 22,000 was impressive, and is something for which Ilıcalı deserved, and arguably still deserves, a great deal of credit. On the pitch, meanwhile, Ilıcalı inherited a squad that had won the League One title the previous season and was sat 19th in the Championship, 7 points above the relegation zone, with the 3rd lowest wage bill in the division. Whilst a lack of spending and ambition under the Allams had understandably been one of the primary complaints in recent years among Hull City supporters, it also made the Tigers an unusually attractive proposition among EFL clubs to prospective buyers. Not only did the club have a very healthy balance sheet, the Tigers were almost entirely self-sustaining, with the owners having taken out more money than they had put in over the preceding 8 years. They had very little debt by Championship standards, just £29 million, the vast majority of it owed to the club's owners, and, most importantly, as a result of their frugality, the Tigers had a great deal of wriggle room when it came to the Championship spending regulations. Whereas many Championship clubs were hamstrung by their FFP or latterly PSR considerations, having incurred significant losses, having barely spent anything over the last 3 years, Ilıcalı was able to maximise the league's profit and loss limits should he wish to do so. Which he did. The Tigers also had just about the lowest revenue in the Championship, and the lowest commercial revenue aside from Peterborough United, meaning that there was plenty of room to grow on that side of the business, in terms of both matchday and commercial income. Ilıcalı began by sacking Hull City manager Grant McCann, something which you may notice becoming something of a theme, and replacing him with Shota Arveladze, a man with fantastic pedigree as a player, but significantly less so in management. Arveladze had never coached in English or even Western European football before. He had been out of work for more than 12 months, and it had been over 5 years since he had managed anywhere outside of Uzbekistan. But he has been friends with Ilıcalı for more than 15 years, the two having met in Turkey, so he got the job. This ought to have been an early warning sign for Hull City supporters perhaps, regarding Ilıcalı's naivety as to the strength of English football and of the Championship, but, as I say, he had bought himself a lot of early goodwill. Hull finished the season in 19th, the same position they were in when Ilıcalı bought the club and when Arveladze was appointed, and over the summer, Ilıcalı began to flex his financial muscles. Little is known as to Ilıcalı's personal fortune, beyond online speculation. Acun Medya isn't publicly traded, but the 55-year-old, who is an ally of Turkey's authoritarian president Recep Tayyip Erdogan, seemed to experience a rapid bout of good fortune after the Turkish government began a crackdown on free speech in 2016. I covered this in a lot more depth about 3 Hull City videos ago, should any of you be interested, but in 2016, a faction within the Turkish armed forces staged an unsuccessful coup attempt against President Erdogan. Not only did the coup fail, Erdogan used it as a justification to clamp down on dissenting and opposition voices on the pretense of national security. One by one, Turkey's largest media companies were bought up by allies and supporters of President Erdogan and his AK party, with their new coverage reflecting that fact. In 2018, Doğan Holding, which owned the popular newspaper Hürriyet and TV channels, including Kanal D and CNN Turk, was sold to Demirören Holding, a company founded by Erdogan Demirören, which is wholly owned and controlled by the Demirören family. The Demirören family are such close allies of President Erdogan that over 20 years ago, then Prime Minister, rather than President Erdogan, served as a witness at the wedding of Erdogan Demirören's daughter, Fikret Tayfun Demirören, a compliment which the Demirören family repaid when President Erdogan's daughter, Semay, married in 2016. The purchase of Doğan Holding was facilitated by an $895 million loan from Ziraat Bank, a state-owned bank which included a 2-year grace period and a very favourable 6.5% interest rate over the course of the loan's 10-year maturity, despite the fact that Demirören Holding had posted losses of 481 million Turkish lira over the preceding 3 years. Demirören Holding have twice restructured their debt to Ziraat Bank since then, and, according to Reuters, their total debt had risen to $2 billion by 2021. In other words, Turkish taxpayers are subsidising banks to make loans to media organisations close to the president, effectively financing their own propaganda. It is a great deal if you think about it. For President Erdogan and his allies, that is. Admittedly, it is somewhat less beneficial for everyone else. With the sale of Doğan Holding to Demirören Holding, according to a report by Reporters Without Borders, 90% of Turkey's media ecosystem was owned by allies of the president. When Erdogan Demirören died in 2018, President Erdogan visited the Demirören family at their mansion in Istanbul to pay his condolences. Erdogan described Demirören as, and I quote, a precious industrialist and businessman who has made great contributions to our country. End quote. Acun Ilıcalı also paid tribute to Demirören, writing on what was then known as Twitter, quote, I am deeply saddened by the loss of our esteemed elder, Mr. Erdogan Demirören, one of the leading figures of the media and industry world. I offer my condolences to his entire family, especially my dear brother, Yildirim Demirören. May God have mercy on him and grant him a place in heaven. End quote. Ilıcalı has been less explicitly political in terms of his own public statements and the output of his media group, but not in terms of his close relationship with President Erdogan. Erdogan, like Ilıcalı, is a big football fan. He played semi-professionally in his youth and, between 1994 and 2000, before becoming Turkey's Prime Minister and later President, he was the president of football club Istanbul Başakşehir. When Başakşehir moved into the brand new Başakşehir Fatih Terim Stadium in 2014, as you can see here, Ilıcalı was just about the only businessman, alongside Erdogan's son, politicians and retired footballers, to feature in the stadium's opening exhibition game. When Acun Medya acquired TV8 in 2013, one of Turkey's most popular television channels, they scrapped the channel's hard-hitting news and current affairs show, which covered politics, and replaced it with reality TV shows and light entertainment. Ilıcalı, who has been nicknamed the Turkish Simon Cowell, would presumably claim that that was a business decision designed to attract greater views, just as all of Erdogan's allies would presumably have their own explanations as to why their media empires, TV channels and newspapers no longer criticise the president and his party, but regardless of the motive, it was yet another move that was very conveniently very useful for the Turkish president. Sorry, that wasn't nearly as brief as I'd hoped, but hopefully that is sufficient context. Back to Ilıcalı's first summer in charge, and the flexing of his financial muscles. Having finished 19th in his first half season at the MKM Stadium, Ilıcalı didn't attempt to tweak the Hull City squad. He effectively tore it up and started again. A total of 16 new players were brought in, including loanees. Meanwhile, 11 players departed, including star man Keane Lewis Potter, who joined Brentford for a potential club record £20 million. There was a distinctly Turkish twinge to Hull City's recruitment, either in terms of the nationality of the players themselves or where they had previously played. When he bought the club, Ilıcalı was quoted in the Turkish media as saying, quote, "God willing, my dream will come true. I want to fly the flag of our country in England with the success of Hull City. I hope that Hull City will be made up of Turks, from the coaches to the players in the future. My goal is to create a team that creates a sound in the world." End quote. In came the likes of Doğukan Sinik and Ozan Tufan, both Turkish internationals, Aliar Saidmanesh and Dimitros Pelkas, who, along with Tufan, were both brought in from Fenerbahce, the club that Ilıcalı supports and has very close ties to, and Jean-Michel Seri, Oscar Estepinian, Benjamin Tete and Adama Traore, all of whom were either playing in Turkey at the time or had played there before. The Hull City wage bill and overall expenditure ballooned. Wages alone rose by 86% in a single season, as Tufan and Seri, in particular, reportedly became among the highest paid players in the Championship, outside of clubs in receipt of parachute payments. In spite of nearly doubling the wage bill, Ilıcalı's football manager-style scattergun recruitment and rebuild didn't exactly pay dividends. In fact, the team appeared to have actually regressed, falling from 19th the previous season to 20th, when Ilıcalı decided to sack his friend Shota Arveladze just hours before a home game against Luton Town, which Hull lost 2-0. At the time, the Tigers had by far the worst defensive record in the Championship, and former Tigers fullback Liam Rosenior, recently let go by Derby County, was brought in to steady the ship. Rosenior quickly did just that, transforming the Tigers' backline from the worst in the league into one of the best in the bottom half, developing some chemistry among a team of strangers, and amassing enough points to climb all the way up to 15th, 14 points clear of the drop. Over the summer, Rosenior curbed the worst excesses of Ilıcalı and his vice-chairman Tank Hesler's recruitment, steering them towards young domestic talent with no imports from the Turkish Super League. In came the likes of Jadon Philogene, a signing that both Rosenior and Ilıcalı were heavily involved in, along with impressive loanees like Liam Delap and Tyler Morton. Overall expenses rose again, though much less dramatically, up 21% as opposed to 66% the previous season, and the wage bill rose by 25% as opposed to 86%, up to £29.6 million. This reflected Hull's highest ever wage bill outside of the Premier League, all while being in receipt of parachute payments, but it was still only the 13th highest payroll in the division last season. Nonetheless, following a January window in which Ilıcalı once again became more heavily involved, bringing in 7 players, including another Turkish international, a goalkeeper from another club that he used to part own, and Fabio Carvalho, expectations were ramped up. Consequently, despite climbing from 20th when he arrived and 15th the previous season up into 7th, just 1 place and 3 points outside of the playoffs, and having been rewarded with a new contract mid-season, manager Liam Rosenior was sacked. Rosenior has since joined blue co-owned Strasbourg, who finished 13th on 39 points, with the 12th highest wage bill in Ligue 1 under Patrick Vieira last season, but climbed to 7th, amassing 57 points this season, and most likely qualifying for European football next season, subject to PSG winning the final of the Coupe de France, with the youngest squad and average starting 11 in the recorded history of any of Europe's Big 5 leagues. Strasbourg just handed Rosenior a new contract until 2028, and he is now the third favourite behind Carlo Ancelotti and Simone Inzaghi to be the next manager at Chelsea, a club who only sack managers slightly less often than Hull. Ilıcalı cited Rosenior's style of play as the primary justification behind his dismissal, pointing to a lack of goals and entertainment during Hull's 7th place finish, having stated that he would rather lose games 3-2 than draw them 0-0 when he bought the club. Again, probably should have been a red flag, but with Ding Dong the Allams are gone and all, most people were willing to overlook 1, 2, 3, or perhaps even 734 minor red flags. So jading had the Allam years become, many people still are, in spite of what, I promise you, we are about to come to. Last summer, though, there were more red flags than at a North Korean military parade. Rosenior was replaced by former Hamburg boss Tim Walter, a maverick German head coach renowned for his eccentric tactics and stubbornness when it comes to both compromising upon his system or interacting with his players and the media. These tactics include virtually full positional adaptability, goalkeepers who can literally step out into the centre-back positions and function as sweepers, and centre-backs themselves who overlap to such an extent that one of them often finds themselves playing off the centre-forward, effectively as a number 10. Volta also isn't a particularly big believer in defensive discipline or shutting up shop, which came as music to Ilıcalı's ears, preferring to focus on attempting to outscore the opposition. Volta's cold and disciplined managerial approach, combined with his novel tactics, would have been difficult enough for Hull City players to learn in a single pre-season, contrasted with the warmth and openness of Rosenior's man management and more defensively solid structure, but the difficult was rendered practically impossible, owing to the fact that Hull basically didn't have a pre-season. The Tigers squad was immediately decimated by the loss of 4 loanees, 3 of whom were among the team's star performers, but on top of that, the Tigers sold their 2 most prized assets, Jacob Greaves and Jadon Philogene, for cut price fees early on in the window, with Ilıcalı commenting that by selling early, Greaves and Philogene would be able to participate in pre-season with their new clubs, and stating that he would never stand in the way of a player who wanted to leave, even while conceding that, had Hull waited out longer, they could have got more money for the pair of them, and having initially claimed that he wouldn't even sell Philogene for €30 million. He ultimately sold him for a reported £16 million, or around £13 million, after Villa's sell-on fee. The likes of Ozan Tufan, Ryan Alsop, Jean-Michel Seri, Adama Traore, and Greg Doherty also departed, leaving the Tigers with a threadbare squad and yet another rebuild on their hands. Yet, when the Tigers went on a pre-season tour of Turkey, and even by the time that they returned home, the only player that they had signed was Ryan Giles, who was on loan at the MKM Stadium the previous season, and had a mandatory permanent deal written into his loan contract. Within 3 days of the first game of the season, so with Tim Volta's decisive pre-season well and truly done and dusted by this point, Hull had only made 3 signings. Left-back Ryan Giles, which was a loan deal with an obligation, right-back Cody Dramé, from Leeds United, and midfielder Marvin Malum, fresh through the door at the MKM Stadium, who manager Tim Volta had coached as a youth team player in Germany with Karlsruhe. I got shouted at a lot on the always very reasonable and sane social media website known as X by a handful of Hull City fans for pointing this out at the time, but this wasn't ideal preparation. There were a couple of reasons behind the chaos. One, and this isn't speculation, as the man himself has cited it as the principal reason, Ilıcalı became a director at Fenerbahçe, the club that he supports, alongside his associate and Fenerbahçe president Ali Koç, which he described as one reason why he took his eye off the ball with regards to Hull City's recruitment, or lack thereof. 2, and this is me speaking now, there was a staggering lack of knowledge and experience within the club, or anyone who felt willing and able to hold Ilıcalı to account. And 3, the shock sacking of Rosenior, who made the 3-man shortlist for the Championship Manager of the Year award just a month before he was dismissed, combined with an insane live-streamed question and answer session in which Ilıcalı publicly criticised 2 of his players, led to a grave degradation in confidence in his abilities and radically altered the internal and external perception of Hull City. There were several players in the Hull City dressing room, good players and good people, who didn't take kindly to their teammates and friends being seen to have been so publicly thrown under a bus, who disagreed with Rosenior's dismissal, and who weren't convinced by the man who replaced him. News also doesn't take long to spread in football. Players and agents speak, even to me sometimes, and the shift in the way in which they spoke about Hull City and the projects at the club, to use a very hackneyed term, shifted radically within those weeks, if not days. It was just 9 days, to be specific. Even when Ilıcalı finally shifted his attention towards the club that he actually owns, recruitment as a club perceived as being something of a basket case proved to be far more challenging than it had been under Rosenior the previous season, with most of the club's primary targets, like forwards Kiefer Moore, Tom Cannon and Brandon Thomas Asante, choosing to turn them down. When the Tigers finally clicked into action, they were left floundering in the market, signing a flurry of players, most of whom were either untested or as yet unproven in the Championship. The standout signing at the beginning of the season was Algerian winger Mohamed Belloumi, brought in for between £4 to £5 million from Firenze, but in only the 15th game of the season, he tore his ACL. Belloumi was Hull's second summer signing and second winger to tear his ACL, his setback coming just 4 games after Canadian international Liam Miller suffered the exact same fate. Promising Ecuadorian midfielder Oscar Zambrano, meanwhile, also only played 8 games before being ruled out for the rest of the season, this time owing to a doping ban. Hull knew that Zambrano had failed a drugs test, and the belief in Ecuador, based on precedent, was that he was due a lengthy ban. That was the only reason why Hull were able to sign Zambrano, who was previously sought after by Brighton, but it was a risk that Ilıcalı said would be worth taking. After less than 400 minutes of football for the Tigers, CONMEBOL suspended Zambrano for 16 months. An appeal heard by the Court of Arbitration for Sport saw the ban reduced, but Zambrano is still banned until November 2025. Hull now have until June to decide whether they want to activate a clause to make the Ecuadorians deal a permanent one. The start of the season was a disaster, unsurprisingly, given the shape of the Tigers squad, and the radical tactical transformation that Tim Walter was attempting to implement with his hands tied behind his back. Having failed to win a single pre-season for the first time in living memory, Hull won just 3 of their opening 21 matches, with those 3 victories coming consecutively in the 6th, 7th and 8th games of the season. Despite dropping into the relegation zone, having finished 7th last season, ranked the club's calamitous summer window as his quote best yet, and having promised another promotion push this season, Ilıcalı still had faith in Tim Walter. It was only after a 2-0 home defeat against Sheffield Wednesday, which gave the Owls more wins at the MKM Stadium than Hull themselves this season, in which the Tigers fans booed and chanted for the manager to lose his job, that Ilıcalı U-turned and decided to pull the trigger, having publicly backed Walter in the build-up to that same game. A month before Tim Walter was dismissed, Vice Chairman Tan Kesler, who has hinted that he disagreed with the decision to sack Liam Rosenior, departed under something of a cloud. Reading manager Rubén Sellés was the manager brought in to replace Tim Walter, with Hull sat bottom of the Championship table at the time, despite having played more games than the 3 teams above them. Tim Walter's heart attack football, as it was described, delivered 18 goals in 18 games, a goal a game then, not aided, it must be said, by the Tigers losing the players responsible for scoring 64 of their 68 league goals the previous season, and only signing 2 centre-forwards, who had scored a combined total of 2 goals in 27 games for their previous clubs. They have since scored 5 goals in 52 games for Hull. One of those was a penalty. Sellés had an uphill battle on his hands then, but like Rosenior, he immediately shored up the Tigers' backline and ground out just enough points to keep the Tigers in the division. There is a narrative, among some Hull City fans, that the club only survived this season because there were 3 worse teams than them, which is an inherently stupid claim, since that is definitionally the only reason why a team that avoids relegation ever survives, but it is meant to suggest that Sellés did little to enhance the team's survival prospects. That just plainly isn't true. Hull collected 1.26 points per game on average under Sellés, compared to less than 0.79 points per game before he arrived. Had they maintained the same form from before Sellés arrived over the course of the season as a whole, the Tigers wouldn't just have been relegated, they would have finished bottom of the league, a full 8 points behind last place Cardiff City, 13 points from safety and their actual points tally, and as statistically, the second worst team in the Championship in any post-Covid season, only ahead of Rotherham's 27 points last season. After Sellés arrived, Hull had the fourth best defensive record in the Championship, trailing only Leeds, Burnley and Sheffield United, the three best teams in the division, and they amassed enough points to be 12th, inside of the top half, in a league table only accounting for results during Sellés' time at the helm, above Norwich, Blackburn and Middlesbrough. Naturally, therefore, on the same day that Hull's survival on goal difference was confirmed, away at Portsmouth, thanks to a 1-1 draw on the final day of the season, it was reported by the local press that Rubén Sellés was unlikely to be at the club next season. It was a claim which seemed so outlandish that some dismissed it as rumour or even clickbait, as was the case when the first whispers of Liam Rosenior sacking emerged, exactly 12 months earlier. In reality, the Tigers' hierarchy just aren't very tight-lipped. Almost everything is leaked to the local media, among others, sometimes as a means of gauging the mood of supporters, so Ilıcalı can react to fan sentiment. When reports circulated of an imminent deal being struck for former academy graduate Liam Cooper last summer, for example, who is neither very highly rated nor especially well liked in Hull, owing to him slightly strangely claiming to have grown up supporting Leeds after he joined them, the angry reaction among supporters prompted a screeching U-turn as Cooper's contract offer was revoked and he ended up joining CSKA Sofia instead. Ilıcalı is known, by his own admission, to regularly peruse social media. His widely suspected burner account even follows me, among several others on social media. Justifying his decision to sack Rubén Sellés in an interview with Mike White on BBC Radio Humberside, Ilıcalı stated that his aim wasn't survival this season, but to be in the top half and challenging for the playoffs. Despite the fact that Sellés inherited a decimated ragtag squad that couldn't buy a win and was rock bottom of the division, in addition to a poor set of results in the run-in and a lack of goals from open play. Again, not to hammer home the point too hard here, but if Ilıcalı wanted more goals, which he has repeatedly stated that he does, under multiple different managers now, it might not have been a bad idea to sign someone who is capable of scoring goals. Even during the January window, the biggest signing sanctioned by Ilıcalı was the arrival of Carl Joseph for £2.5 million from Blackpool, who scored 9 goals in 54 games in League One for the Tangerines as a centre-forward, and has since scored 0 goals in 16 games for the Tigers. Joseph is still only 23, and it may be that I am missing something, but he very evidently isn't currently the answer to Hull's goal-scoring woes. When questioned about Hull's managerial turnover on his watch, Ilıcalı repeatedly cited the example of Nottingham Forest owner, Evangelos Marinakis, who has had 10 different managers since he bought the club just 7 years ago. Whilst that is true, Forest have only had 2 managers in nearly 4 years, Steve Cooper and Nuno Espirito Santo, which is the period in which they have enjoyed pretty much all of their success, and even then, it could certainly be argued that Forest are the exception rather than the rule. Brentford, who provide perhaps the most notable blueprint when it comes to Premier League promotion, consolidation, and becoming consistently competitive, have been managed by Thomas Frank since 2018 and have only had 2 managers in the last 10 years. Brighton have had 4 managers in more than a decade, and 2 of them departed of their own accord, rather than being sacked, owing to their success. And Aston Villa have only had 3 managers over the last 7 years, on their rise from the Championship to the Champions League. When this was alluded to Ilıcalı by Mike White, through the example of Watford, Ilıcalı said that he would love to be like Watford, who finished 15th and 14th in the Championship in the last 2 seasons, with among the highest wage bills in the division, because, quote, Watford have been in the Premier League. The most shocking part of the interview, however, came when Ilıcalı was questioned about Emre Belözoğlu. Maybe the most high-profile racist in football, Belözoğlu has been accused of racism on multiple occasions by Joseph Yobo, Tim Howard, and Joleon Lescott all in the same game in 2006 against Everton, by El Hadji Diouf at Bolton Wanderers, by John Obi Mikel at Trabzonspor, and by Al Hassan Bangura at Watford. In 2012, Belözoğlu infamously racially abused former Tottenham midfielder Didier Zokora, then of Trabzonspor, for which he was dealt some immediate karmic justice on the pitch, as Zakora's teammates proceeded to kick lumps out of him. Belözoğlu called Zakora an effing N-word, except of course, he didn't say either effing or N-word, and after being convicted in Turkey, he was handed an insultingly lenient 2-game ban, prompting international condemnation of the Turkish FA, as well as a 2.5-month suspended prison sentence after being convicted in a court of law. Nonetheless, Belözoğlu continued to represent Turkey until his retirement from international football in 2019, becoming the country's 4th most capped player of all time, and he has since moved into coaching and administration, firstly as a director of football and caretaker boss at Ilıcalı's club Fenerbahçe, and subsequently as a manager at Erdogan's Istanbul Başakşehir. Both Belözoğlu and former international teammate Arda Turan are also Erdogan allies and friends of Ilıcalı. And since then, Ankaragücü and currently Antalyaspor, who he joined in January, and are currently 12th in the Turkish Super League. It was revealed not long before Ilıcalı's interview with Mike White, by the same local media that broke the news that Rubén Sellés was about to lose his job, that Belözoğlu had emerged as the front-runner to become the next Hull City boss. Even on purely sporting merits, replacing Sellés with Belözoğlu, another friend of Ilıcalı's who has never coached outside of Turkey before, would be insane. Factor in the fact that he is football's best-known racist, though, and it was both shameful and insane. Ilıcalı responded initially by confirming that Belözoğlu was one of the candidates to get the job, before proceeding to deny that Belözoğlu was a racist at all. Ilıcalı rejected the idea that Belözoğlu had been convicted in Turkey of being a racist, noting that he had, in fact, only been convicted of using a racial slur. When Mike White proposed that they might be the same thing, Ilıcalı said, and this is a genuine quote here, in case some of you think that I'm exaggerating this, you can go and listen to it online, quote, "If you don't mean it, it's not racism." End quote.
He was not convicted to be a racist.
A racist slur?
No, yes. It is different.
But that's racist. If he used a racist slur, that's racism.
No. If you don't mean it, it's not racism.
A reminder at this point that Belözoğlu has been accused of using racial slurs against at least 7 players and was convicted of calling Didier Zakora an effing N-word. But he isn't a racist, he is just someone who really, really, really likes using racist slurs. This is obviously insane. It's like claiming that Jimmy Savile wasn't a nonce, he was just someone who liked to prolifically abuse children, as though there were any real or meaningful distinction between those two things. The crazy wasn't done there, though. Ilıcalı also dismissed the idea that Belözoğlu could be a racist because one of his best friends, Pierre Webo, is black, and Webo is one of his 5 assistants at Antalyaspor. I mean, come on, sure. He might have repeatedly racially abused black players and have still, age 44, never apologised for any of them, but I mean, a fifth, a whopping 20% of his assistant managers are black, so can you really call him a racist? Your Honour, how could I be a racist? Some of my best assistant managers are black. It is a shame that Ilıcalı didn't represent Belözoğlu in his criminal case, because with a defence like that, I've little doubt that he would have been acquitted. Ilıcalı went one step further than that, though. Not only is Belözoğlu not a racist, nor is anyone in Turkey, according to Ilıcalı, a nation of 85 million people. Ilıcalı claimed, and again, I quote, "In Turkey, there is no racism. As Turks, we don't know what is racism." End quote.
First of all, in Turkey, there is no racism. So, as Turks, we don't know even what is racism.
Well, I suppose that second statement might be true if Ilıcalı is anything to go by. The fact that there is no racism in Turkey or among Turks no doubt came as some surprise to Kurds and Armenians. God knows what they've been complaining about for all these years. But it is welcome news for Emre Belözoğlu, who, definitionally now, as a Turk living in Turkey I suppose, cannot be a racist. Again, case closed, Your Honour. Why didn't he attempt that defence in court? It is a faultless argument. Ilıcalı went on to claim that black players are actually better received in Turkey than other foreign or even Turkish players, and that no black player has ever received any racist abuse or discrimination in Turkey, despite the fact that one of his managerial candidates has quite literally been convicted of racist abuse against a black player, and claimed that you could check the veracity of his claim by Googling it or asking AI. This is all incredibly surreal and deranged, we are truly through the looking glass, but I did Google it and ask AI because I'm nothing if not thorough, and it would appear as though there must be some kind of a mistake within the alphabet and ChatGPT headquarters because, completely inaccurately, they told me that there was in fact some racism in Turkey, and that the likes of Didier Drogba, Emmanuel Aboué, Samuel Eto'o, John Obi Mikel, Jerome Opoku, and oddly, even Didier Zakora, had all received racist abuse while playing in the Turkish Super League, most of them, very oddly, also in games against Ilıcalı's own club Fenerbahce, where he sits on the board of directors, so you really would have thought that he might be more familiar with those examples. It's all very strange. I guess it just goes to show how far AI still has to come, peddling that kind of reckless misinformation. Later on in the interview, when questioned about some of the backlash that he had received from some Hull City supporters in response to sacking Rubén Sellés, and the shift in sentiment towards him, Ilıcalı told Mike White that he is still very popular, describing himself as one of the 3 most popular men in Turkey. I can only assume that at least one of the other 2 are black, maybe it is Emre Belözoğlu's assistant, and that he can't cross a street in Turkey because all of the cars stop and everyone wants to hug him. So that's reassuring. Maybe that's why we didn't get any business done until the end of the window last summer. While all of our best players departed, poor old Acun was just trying to cross a street in Istanbul, but got love-bombed by hordes of adoring fans. It took him 7 weeks. So where are we now? Well, at the time of recording, Hull City don't have a manager, though one is expected to be appointed imminently. Doken Cynic, who is probably Hull City's worst signing of all time, has just left the club, having played a grand total of 367 minutes at the MKM Stadium since joining the Tigers for a reported fee of more than £4 million from Emre Belözoğlu's club Antalyaspor 3 years ago. That is equivalent to just 4 whole games of football. According to reports, in terms of his combined fee and wages, Cynic set the club back somewhere in the region of £20,000 for every minute that he played, over £500,000 per appearance, and close to £7 million for every goal contribution. He made 1 goal contribution. It was an assist away at Cardiff. Whoever replaces Rubén Sellés can look forward to reintegrating Liam Miller and Mohamed Baloumi after almost 12 months on the sidelines, along with Elliot Matazo, who made a positive impression in his first 6 appearances following his January arrival last season, before, you guessed it, also rupturing his ACL, which could rule him out until November. Reintegrating Ryan Giles, who spent the second half of last season on loan at Middlesbrough, may prove to be more of a challenge. Having had an excellent 2022-23 season, Giles has struggled at Luton and Hull since then, with the Tigers rueing their decision to commit about 1/5 of their entire annual revenue on an obligation to sign the left-back, which also made him one of the highest-paid players at the club, following an unsuccessful loan spell in which he was dropped for academy graduate Matty Jacob. A loan move to Borough, back under Carrick, was supposed to either breathe new life into the 25-year-old or, more likely, lead to a permanent move to Middlesbrough, recouping at least some of the money that the Tigers had spent on him. It has done neither of those things, though, and based upon his combined wages and transfer fee, contrasted with what the club has got in return, Giles may well come to rival Cynic as one of the club's worst ever signings. That is on top of the Tigers paying Oscar Zambrano's wages for a season, the vast majority of which he has been suspended for due to a widely foreseen doping ban, and an astronomical reported £1 million loan fee on top of his £25,000 a week wages to take 21-year-old Louis Barry on loan from Aston Villa for just over 3 months. Barry picked up a serious injury to the cartilage in his knee in his 4th game on loan at Hull. Again, of course he did, making him also among the most expensive signings on a per-game or per-minute basis in the history of the club. João Pedro, not that one, who was Hull's top scorer last season with 6 goals, has had a 1-year extension activated on his contract, but is still expected to depart, with former Scotland international Ollie McBurney seemingly the club's first-choice centre-forward to replace him. Midfielders Steven Alzate and Gustavo Puerta are both linked with moves away this summer, despite the fact that the latter only just joined the club from Bayer Leverkusen for a reported €3.5 million after an appearance clause was triggered in his loan deal, obligating Hull to make the deal a permanent. For the second summer in a row, Hull require a major rebuild, but lack the consistency of even having the same head coach from the previous campaign. Since Acun Ilıcalı arrived at Hull City, the club's annual expenses have more than doubled, up from 21.3 to 42.8 million pounds. The wage bill is up 133%, from 12.7 to 29.6 million pounds, and net debt has risen almost 130%, from 28.8 to 65.8 million pounds. The Tigers were 19th when Ilıcalı arrived, and just finished 21st this season. It is what investors might call a not especially impressive return on investment, and unlike last summer, Hull don't have two highly valuable assets to offload in order to raise funds. It is worth reiterating that, while sentiment towards Ilıcalı has undoubtedly shifted, in light of chaotic recruitment and squad planning, brainless managerial turnover, and, he just claimed that being racist isn't racist if you don't mean it, didn't he? But it is by no means unanimous, and there are still ride-or-die fans of Ilıcalı within the Hull City fan base, either to whom he can seemingly do no wrong, or who think that, though deeply flawed and quite possibly driving the club towards ruin, given Hull City's record in terms of ownership, whoever replaces him may somehow be even worse. I have said for over 18 months, documented on this channel, and it wasn't a particularly popular sentiment back then, as we were inside of the playoffs, that so long as Acun Ilıcalı is the one calling the shots at Hull City, and significant footballing decisions aren't delegated to someone with some degree of expertise and experience when it comes to actually running a football club, chaos and volatility will ensue. Even I didn't predict quite how chaotic it would be, but certainly, there has been no evidence over the last 12 months to suggest either that wasn't, or that it won't, continue to be the case. Sorry, what's that? Oh, for fuck's sake. We've just been linked with Mick Beale. You're telling me that we might have sacked Liam Rosenior and Rubén Sellés in order to appoint a bloke who has been out of work since he was sacked as Steven Gerrard's assistant in Saudi Arabia, having previously been sacked after just 12 games at Sunderland, where he allegedly used to argue with their own supporters on a burner account on social media. Maybe him and Ilıcalı just bonded over their shared love of burner accounts. Nah, seriously, I'm checking out. Can't do this anymore.
Just hold on. No, I'm not having this. I'm not having this. No.
The bar for my expectations really couldn't be much lower at this point, and yet, somehow, they still keep on being exceeded. Still, at least it's good news about Turkey ending racism. Ilıcalı's next Q&A is scheduled for later this week, so I guess I'll see you for another What on Earth is Going On at Hull City video then. That is it for now for today's video. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching, listening to my therapy session. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, you absolute sickos. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, both for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also, arguably, even more importantly, my second channel, Alfie Potts Armour. The most recent video is actually about Hull City ladies, so good to know that both the men and the women's team are an absolute shambles. But yeah, check that out. There will be links to both of those about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos, one from each. You can also find me on social media, and you can support me additionally now, either over there on the Alfie Potts Armour YouTube channel or via buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potts Armour. All of the links to do all of those things should be down in the video description below, but more importantly, I hope you all have a bloody brilliant day. Except Emre Belözoğlu. Cheers!